Have you ever noticed how some people only seem to realize what they had once it's gone? Especially when it comes to relationships. There's a pattern we often see. The avoidant partner who always keeps a little distance suddenly feels the weight of loss when the empath finally decides to walk away, quietly. Avoidants are experts at keeping emotional walls up. They're cautious, independent, and sometimes afraid of closeness. They often withdraw or avoid when things get intense, and in doing so, they can make their partner, the empath, feel unseen, unheard, and sometimes even unworthy. The empath, on the other hand, is deeply attuned. They give, nurture, and sense the emotional undercurrents in a way that the avoidant may never fully understand. But here's the thing. Empaths have limits. They can only tolerate so much emotional unavailability before it starts to take a toll. And when they finally decide to leave, it's rarely dramatic. There's no shouting, no breaking of dishes, no desperate chase. It's quiet, intentional, and powerful. And that's when the avoidant feels it. The sudden gap, the echo of absence where attention used to be taken for granted. The breakdown isn't just about losing someone. It's about realizing what they had only in the mirror of absence. The avoidant suddenly confronts the very thing they avoided: intimacy, vulnerability, and the depth of feeling they were never prepared to fully hold. And the quiet departure of the empath? It's like a gentle but unyielding mirror that reflects, you had this and now it's gone. This dynamic teaches us something profound. Sometimes the most powerful actions aren't dramatic confrontations, but the quiet, self-respecting decision to walk away. The avoidance breakdown isn't punishment, it's revelation. And for the empath, it's liberation. Walking away quietly isn't weakness, it's a statement of strength, boundaries, and emotional awareness. So, if you've been giving your all to someone who can't meet you halfway, remember this: your peace is not selfish. Sometimes leaving quietly is the most effective way to preserve your heart, and maybe, just maybe, to make someone else finally realize what real connection feels like. Avoidants are people who naturally build emotional walls around themselves. This isn't because they lack feelings or don't care, but because intimacy, vulnerability, and deep emotional connection can feel overwhelming or even threatening to them. From an outside perspective, it might seem like they're distant or disinterested, but what's really happening is a self-protective mechanism. They've learned, consciously or unconsciously, that keeping a certain distance shields them from potential pain, rejection, or loss. When in a relationship, they often maintain this space by avoiding difficult conversations, deflecting emotional intimacy, or retreating when things get too intense. This can leave their partner, especially an empath, feeling invisible, dismissed, or emotionally neglected. The empath, who is naturally sensitive and attuned to emotional cues, notices everything. They sense the withdrawal, the hesitation, the subtle ways the avoidant holds back, and it triggers a longing for closeness. The avoidant may not realize it, but their actions communicate inconsistency, unpredictability, and emotional unavailability. The empath, driven by care and understanding, often attempts to bridge that gap. They offer reassurance, try to interpret mixed signals, and work to meet the avoidant halfway, hoping that patience and understanding will eventually create space for real connection. Over time, this dynamic can become exhausting for the empath. While the avoidant may feel comfortable with distance, the empath feels the weight of giving so much without receiving equal emotional investment. This imbalance is subtle but cumulative. It chips away at the empath's emotional energy and sense of security in the relationship. The avoidance walls, though protective for them, can inadvertently create a cycle where closeness is both desired and feared. Each time the empath tries to connect, the avoidant may retreat, causing tension and frustration. This is not a reflection of the empath's value or effort, but rather the avoidant's internal struggle with vulnerability and emotional exposure. The avoidance can manifest in many ways: changing the subject when emotions arise, leaving conversations unfinished, prioritizing independence over intimacy, or showing affection inconsistently. Each of these behaviors reinforces the pattern of distance, even if the avoidant cares deeply. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for empaths. Recognizing that the avoidance behavior stems from fear and self-protection, not rejection of the empath, allows for a compassionate perspective. Yet, empathy has limits, and prolonged exposure to this pattern without reciprocity can erode the empath's emotional well-being. Over time, the accumulation of these subtle emotional barriers sets the stage for the empath to make a conscious decision, either continually accommodate the avoidance distance or step back to protect their own heart. The avoidant may not notice the strain at first because the walls feel natural to them, but the empath senses the imbalance profoundly. It is in this delicate interplay between distance and care that the seeds of eventual realization are planted. Empaths give deeply in relationships, often more than they realize, because they are naturally attuned to the emotions of those around them. They sense feelings on a level that goes beyond words, picking up on subtle cues, body language, and shifts in tone that others might completely miss. This sensitivity allows them to offer care, support, and understanding that can feel almost effortless, but it also makes them exceptionally vulnerable when their efforts are not reciprocated. Unlike avoidants, who instinctively protect themselves by keeping a distance, empaths tend to pour their energy into connection. They notice when someone is hurting, anxious, or withdrawn, and they often respond with patience and reassurance, believing that attention, love, and understanding can bridge any emotional gap. However, even the most patient empath has limits. Emotional labor is not infinite, and constant exposure to someone who resists intimacy or withdraws can begin to erode their sense of self. The empath might start feeling drained, frustrated, or unappreciated, yet their natural inclination is to keep giving, hoping that the other person will eventually open up. This dynamic creates a delicate tension. The empath's deep care collides with the avoidant's habitual distance. The empath notices every retreat, every hesitation, and every moment of withdrawal, often overanalyzing what they could have done differently, when in reality, the avoidance behavior has little to do with their actions. Over time, the repeated experience of giving without receiving equally teaches the empath something important about boundaries, self-respect, and emotional sustainability. They begin to recognize that their love and care are not enough to change the avoidance pattern, no matter how much they try. The empath's awareness of this imbalance often builds gradually. At first, they may rationalize the avoidance distance as a quirk, a phase, or a reflection of past experiences that make vulnerability difficult. They may continue to invest hope, energy, and emotional resources, thinking that patience will eventually soften the walls. But the empath's sensitivity is also their guide. It whispers that prolonged exposure to inconsistency is damaging, that they deserve a connection where effort is mutual, and that their emotional energy is finite. Eventually, this awareness leads to a critical turning point. The empath starts to evaluate the cost of giving so much without receiving the same depth of care in return. It's not a dramatic epiphany, but a quiet, steady recognition that they must honor their own emotional needs. Walking away, when it finally happens, is not a sudden act of anger, but a thoughtful, intentional decision grounded in self-preservation. It is an act of clarity, knowing that their well-being matters, knowing that their love is valuable, and knowing that sometimes the strongest response is not to chase or plead, but to step back and reclaim their peace. The empath's limits, once reached, mark the moment when quiet departure becomes a form of empowerment, a way to protect their heart while holding on to dignity and grace. The quiet departure of an empath carries a power that is often underestimated. Unlike dramatic breakups filled with shouting, confrontations, or ultimatums, walking away quietly is subtle, intentional, and profoundly impactful. There's a reason this approach affects the avoidant partner so deeply. It removes the emotional tension they've grown accustomed to managing, while also stripping away the safety net they've relied on. Avoidants are experts at emotional detachment, but even they are not immune to the absence of someone who consistently cared, understood, and invested in them. When the empath finally steps away without fanfare, it creates a vacuum, a space where the avoidant can no longer rely on the constant reassurance or emotional labor they may have taken for granted. The power of a quiet exit lies in its silence. There are no arguments to dismiss, no tears to minimize, and no urgent attempts to repair the dynamic. The empath doesn't chase because they understand that the energy spent in pursuit of someone unwilling to meet them halfway only perpetuates imbalance. Instead, they walk with intention, leaving the avoidant to face the consequences of their own patterns. This absence is almost like a mirror, reflecting back all the ways they failed to fully engage, all the moments they retreated, and all the opportunities to connect that were ignored. The avoidant may initially feel confusion, irritation, or even disbelief because the empath's withdrawal doesn't fit the usual narrative they're accustomed to. Often, people who maintain emotional distance expect reactions of panic, bargaining, or visible upset. When the empath doesn't react in those ways, the avoidant is forced into an unfamiliar emotional territory, one where they must confront the reality of loss without control or manipulation. What makes the quiet departure so transformative is that it respects both parties while simultaneously enforcing accountability. The empath doesn't seek to shame or punish the avoidant, they simply honor their own emotional boundaries. This act is a demonstration of strength and self-respect. It signals that love and care have limits and that even the most patient, nurturing individuals cannot sustain themselves in one-sided relationships indefinitely. Over time, the absence can trigger profound self-reflection in the avoidant. Without the constant presence of the empath, they may begin to recognize the depth of what they lost, the consistency of care they overlooked, and the emotional availability they failed to cultivate. This realization often comes slowly, sometimes painfully, because it requires them to examine their own patterns of avoidance, fear, and detachment. The empath's quiet departure is therefore not just an ending, it is a catalyst for awareness. It teaches that presence and effort in relationships matter, that emotional labor is not infinite, and that the true weight of connection is only realized when it is gone. By leaving without drama, the empath holds on to dignity while allowing the avoidant to fully feel the consequences of their choices, creating space for both parties to evolve emotionally in ways that confrontation or prolonged compromise could never achieve. The breakdown of the avoidant partner is not simply about losing someone, it is about the sudden confrontation with the very thing they have spent so long avoiding: vulnerability and emotional intimacy. Avoidants often build their relationships around distance, independence, and self-protection. They have learned, sometimes unconsciously, that opening up too much can lead to hurt, disappointment, or feeling trapped. This avoidance becomes a habit, a lens through which they navigate not only relationships but life itself. Yet, when an empath finally decides to walk away quietly, it removes the safety net the avoidant has relied upon. For years, the avoidant may have kept a partner close enough to provide comfort and attention, but far enough away to maintain emotional control. They may have assumed that as long as the empath remained available, they would never truly have to face the discomfort of emotional vulnerability. The quiet exit shatters that illusion. The absence of the empath creates an unanticipated vacuum, a space in which the avoidant cannot retreat behind their usual walls. Suddenly, the emotional reality of loss, connection, and regret hits. The breakdown is not about drama or manipulation. It is about the avoidant finally feeling the consequences of their patterns. They realize that they cannot avoid emotions forever and that the very intimacy they feared losing is now gone. This confrontation with absence is both shocking and enlightening. It forces reflection on past behaviors, missed opportunities for connection, and the moments where emotional withdrawal may have caused pain. The avoidant is faced with the truth that someone who truly cared has chosen self-respect and boundaries over continued compromise. Often this realization is uncomfortable because it requires the avoidant to acknowledge their own shortcomings. They may feel guilt, regret, or even fear as they come face to face with the understanding that they let someone valuable slip away. This emotional reckoning is not about punishment, it is about awareness. The quiet departure of the empath acts as a mirror, reflecting the avoidant's own fears, insecurities, and avoidance back at them without judgment or confrontation. In this way, the breakdown is a form of awakening. It is the moment when the avoidant finally sees the emotional depth they were capable of experiencing but too often kept at bay. They recognize that emotional connection is not a threat but a gift, one that they must learn to hold with care rather than avoidance. The quiet, intentional exit of the empath emphasizes the power of boundaries and self-respect. It demonstrates that love cannot flourish in one-sided efforts, and that sometimes the most profound lessons in relationships come not through arguments or ultimatums, but through absence and reflection. The avoidance breakdown, then, is both a consequence and a revelation, a realization that intimacy, vulnerability, and genuine connection are things to be embraced, not feared, and that their own emotional growth may depend on facing what they once ran from. Walking away from someone you care about is never easy, but for the empath, it is often an act of profound strength and self-respect. It is a choice that acknowledges a fundamental truth. Your peace, emotional well-being, and dignity are non-negotiable. Empaths are naturally giving, nurturing, and deeply attuned to the needs of others, which can make stepping away feel counterintuitive or even selfish. Yet there comes a point when continued investment in a one-sided relationship becomes harmful, draining, and unsustainable. The decision to leave quietly is not about revenge, punishment, or dramatic gestures. It's about honoring oneself, recognizing limits, and choosing to prioritize emotional health over the comfort of familiarity. By stepping back, the empath draws a line that says, I have loved, I have cared, and now I must protect my heart. This act is powerful precisely because it is calm, intentional, and unyielding. It demonstrates clarity of purpose. The empath understands that their love is valuable and that it should be met with reciprocity, not indifference. Walking away quietly also challenges the avoidant partner in ways confrontation cannot. Avoidants are accustomed to controlling the emotional rhythm of a relationship through distance, withdrawal, or subtle manipulation. When the empath leaves without drama, without pleading or bargaining, the avoidant is confronted with the reality of absence. There is no immediate emotional response to manage, no visible display of pain to dismiss. Instead, they are left with the stark truth: someone who truly cared is gone, and the consequences of their avoidance and emotional unavailability are unavoidable. This type of departure requires courage because it involves resisting the instinct to explain, justify, or plead for recognition. The empath cannot rely on emotional escalation to force the avoidant to understand their value. Instead, they act in alignment with their own self-worth, creating a boundary that is clear and non-negotiable. Over time, this quiet withdrawal can have transformative effects, not only on the avoidant, but on the empath as well. For the avoidant, it may spark reflection, awareness, and even growth as they realize that emotional connection cannot be taken for granted. For the empath, it is an affirmation of strength, self-respect, and emotional intelligence. Walking away quietly is a declaration that love is not synonymous with self-sacrifice at the expense of one's own well-being. It is an act of liberation, demonstrating that boundaries are a form of empowerment rather than weakness. In the end, the empath's choice to step back preserves their dignity while honoring the lessons learned from the relationship. It reinforces the understanding that genuine love requires balance, effort, and reciprocity, and that sometimes the most profound impact we can have on another person is not through dramatic confrontations, but through calm, decisive, and self-respecting action. By walking away quietly, the empath embodies strength, clarity, and the courage to prioritize their own heart, proving that true empowerment comes not from control over others, but from mastery over one's own choices and boundaries. In the end, relationships teach us profound lessons about love, boundaries, and self-respect. Walking away quietly is not a sign of weakness, but a declaration of strength, a choice to honor your own heart while allowing others to face the reality of their actions. It reminds us that true connection requires effort, reciprocity, and emotional presence from both sides, and that sometimes the most powerful change comes not through confrontation, but through calm, intentional action. Thank you for listening, And may we all have the courage to protect our peace while embracing the love we truly deserve.